Okay, good. Well, I'm going to amuse myself for about 8 more minutes, and then we'll be done. How's that? I would recommend that you buy this book and read it every year if you want to be a writer. It's called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. And I think it has probably replaced E.B. White's book on style. Is maybe a great foundational book for people in the business or in the craft to be familiar with and to read and think about. I don't agree with everything that Zinsser says, but it's certainly a great book for pushing you past the limitations of all the academic writing you've been done. It'll push you out into more writing and real writing and better writing in a number of ways. It's a great book, and it's easy to read. It's not dense at all. Lots of illustrations and examples. I would consider the book On Writing Well. Zinsser says, my father was a businessman. His grandfather had come from Germany in the great immigration of 1848 with a formula for making shellac. And he talks about how his family bought this land, they built this factory, that it was sort of an expectation that he was going to take over the business. It was a successful business. And he was the only son in those days. It wasn't like his father was thinking about giving the business to his daughter. Not that it would have been a bad idea, but it just culturally wasn't what he was thinking about. And my father was a man who loved his business. When he talked about it, I never felt that he regarded it as a venture for making money. It was an art to be practiced with imagination and patience. Imagination and only the best materials. He had a passion for quality and had no patience with the second rate. He never went into a store looking for a bargain. He charged more for his product because he made it with the best ingredients, and his company prospered. It was a ready-made future for me, and my father looked forward to the day I would join him. But inevitably, a different day arrived, and not long after I came home from the war, I went to work with the New York Herald Tribune and had to tell my father I wasn't going to carry on the family business. He accepted the news with his usual generosity and wished me well in my chosen field. No boy or girl could receive a finer gift. I was liberated from having to fulfill somebody else's expectations, which were not the right ones for me. I was free to succeed or fail on my own terms. Only later did I realize that I took along on my journey another gift from my father, a bone-deep belief that quality is its own reward. I, too, have never gone into a store looking for a bargain. Although my mother was the literary one in our family, magpie collector of books, lover of the English language, writer of dazzling letters, it was from the world of business that I absorbed my craftsman's ethic. And over the years, when I find myself endlessly rewriting what I had endlessly rewritten, determined to write better than everybody who was competing for the same space, the inner voice I was hearing was the voice of my father talking about shellac. And here's another father story from a book called Grace is Where I Live, The Landscape of Faith in Writing. It's by a poet named John Leax. And John talks about how his father and mother had left sort of whatever they were doing and bought a farm and sort of made it work. And it's after the funeral, and he's riding back through the property, and he says this: the place he had made, as I viewed it that morning, was not the end of his life. His end was to achieve something far more difficult to measure in price than an estate. His end was to realize the moment of building and to live a full and abundant life in the only time life is alive, the present. As a result, he was free of the burden of the future, free of the burden of finishing that diminishes the working. And free of those burdens, he was free to concentrate on the act of working. He was free to reach for holiness. I say reach for holiness because ultimately holiness is never achieved. It is setting one's mind in the direction of God. It is setting aside what one is to become what God wills. A little later, he says, I've written as if my father and I were alike. In many ways we were, but in an important way we are not. I remember the day he told me he had never read a work of fiction, not even Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, which I'd given to him. I felt a personal loss. I lived by saying my words in poems. My father lived his life without words. He rarely rose to self-consciousness. With his hands, what his hands could touch was all the world he needed. Yet even in this difference, there is a likeness, for my father was a craftsman who cared more for the act of making, for the assault on perfection, than for the finished product. And it was in his work, not in the product of his work, that he approached holiness. I'm learning the same is true for me, though I work not in wood, but in words. I'm closing with a story of three fathers. And the other one, of course, is my own, who taught me that words matter, that they had power, that they could transform things. And by taking delight in them, and by measuring them, and by considering them, you could do amazing things. His was an amazing life. He wrote and published 15 books. He started several churches. He preached around the world. He preached to audiences in India one time of 15,000. But it was because he believed in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he took that seriously. The idea that the Word can become flesh, that we can make it concrete and real. He touched and changed me and my profession and my calling. Now you think about these three guys, a woodworker, a shellac maker, and a Baptist preacher from the South. And how do you get there from that? And what I'd encourage you to do is not to just consider your love of words and your ability with words, but to consider the shape and the force of your life. How has it come together? And who were the people that have touched you? And who has God placed in your life that has encouraged you? And what are you being called to do? Because you may be being called to be a writer, and you may be being called to be a videographer, and you may be being called to be the best creative director in an advertising agency in the world. I don't know what you're being called to be, but it's in the working itself. It's being committed to the work. It's being focused on learning the work. It's in that passion that these other things emerge. Don't spend all your time and energy worrying about the future. There's plenty of sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. Spend some time and energy focusing on the things that you're learning to love and learn to do them well. And then God will open doors, and you will find your calling, and you will be well. Oh, thank you for your time. I appreciate it and enjoyed being here.